So our next speaker is someone who has been at the very upper echelons of government. She was the head of the Small Business Administration under President Obama, and she was part of the cabinet. And she has thought more about how to help small business than probably pretty much anyone else in this country. And she's recently written a book, which we'll be talking about a little bit, and she has tirelessly worked. She started off as a VC, and she's worked her entire career really trying to help small businesses. So please join me in welcoming Karen Mills. Karen? Welcome. Oh, you did? Okay, nice. Well, welcome, Karen. Thank you for joining us here.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. So maybe let's just start. You were first at LendIt back in 2015. We're in New York, and you said at the time that you were very excited about the innovations that were happening in small business lending. We're 4 years on now. Why don't you just maybe give us your perspective on what's changed? Has the innovations kind of reached have they done what you thought they would do and hoped they would do? Or where are we at?
Well, Peter, as you know, I so enjoyed that LendIt visit that I wrote about it in the book. There was a feeling in 2015 LendIt that perhaps all the dinosaurs, the old banks, were going to die, and that the fintechs were going to take over. And in fact, the keynote before mine was Larry Summers,
right,
who said exactly that.
Mm-hmm.
So of course it proved more complicated, but one has to sort of pay attention to that moment because it changed the way people think about small business lending, which hadn't changed in 50 or 100 years. So now fast forward 4 years, we've got a playing field which has Amazon and PayPal and Square and Amex and JP Morgan and Bank of America, mm-hmm, and all of the fintechs still. Where is this, who are going to be the winners and losers? And the issues on the table are markedly different, and I would say much more important, because what was happening in 2015 is that the customer experience was transformed. That painful weight of months, that stack of paperwork, were alleviated by innovation and technology, which was massively important. But now the question is, who is going to provide the ways of aggregating this data and using artificial intelligence? And that really wasn't yet on the horizon. Mm-hmm. I think it is even more impactful, maybe not a word, but even more transformational a moment today than actually it was 4 years ago.
Because why? Because you think that the new tools are going to make an even bigger transformation? Is that?
Well, the pain points of small business lending are actually a little bit different than consumer lending. The pain points of small business lending are information opacity. You just can't figure out actually what's going on inside a small business. Is that business profitable? Is it creditworthy? The small business owner maybe doesn't even know themselves. And then the second pain point or friction is heterogeneity. All small businesses are different. So one day you're lending to a dry cleaner, the next you're lending to an automotive parts, and maybe the credit underwriting is different. Mm-hmm. Big data and artificial intelligence actually deal with those two issues. So in my book, I jump forward into the future, mm-hmm, and think about what happens if you can take data up through APIs, look into a balance sheet, look into the QuickBooks account, and actually understand what's going inside a small business. That will provide, from whoever decides they're going to play in this game, a much wider set of choices and services for small business owners, and probably make more credit available for those who are creditworthy, reduce the frictions in the market.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about your book. You can hold it up so everyone can see.
All right.
Why did you decide to write a book about small business and fintech?
You know, I was thinking about this question because the book actually launched last week on Amazon. And it was 10 years ago this week that I started working for President Obama as the head of the SBA. And if you all remember 10 years ago, it was a really difficult time.
Right.
Credit markets had frozen, and I was able to convince, actually Larry Summers was the head of the National Economic Council, and I convinced him and President Obama to let me do something quite aggressive. I raised the guarantee rate at SBA to 90%. And they said, you can't do that, it's too risky. And I said, no, nobody is lending, and we need to get credit flowing. And I'm happy to say that we got 1,000 banks back to SBA lending in 6 months. And that experience imprinted on me the importance of access to capital to small business. In the first quarter that I was in office, we lost 1.8 million small business jobs in 1 quarter. So I know what happens when there is no access to credit. When we looked forward and I started coming to LendIt, I saw the opportunity to make a transformational change with technology. And I really have written the book to encourage all of you who are fintechs, all of you who are bankers, to embrace this and get those solutions out there.
Right, right. So then maybe you could give us a sense, like obviously there's small business lenders in the audience, there's bankers in the audience. What is the playbook from your perspective in going forward? How should the lenders today expand their small business lending? What's the playbook?
Well, I say in the book that I would not count out banks. And the big banks are definitely going to play. JP Morgan just announced a very big technology investment, but also the community banks have a role. So in the future that I imagine, assuming that we get some kind of data ownership or regulatory, I have 2 chapters on regulation, don't all go to sleep, but it is going to be one of the critical players, and I guess we're going to talk about that. But imagining that we have sort of the ability to bring these data pipes out, I think banks are going to be able to acquire from fintechs or license from fintechs or partner with technology platform providers to give basically a dashboard to a small business owner. And it will be the same kind of information they use to make a credit decision. So that same information will tell a small business owner how much credit they actually need to go forward, how much do they need to borrow. And right on the dashboard, there would be a button that says, you know, like your credit card, you have a cloud of credit that floats around with you. It is available to you. Therefore, you should feel confident that you have the liquidity and you can go off and run your business successfully. I call that in the book Small Business Utopia.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And if a community banker provides that in a platform, then the relationship person doesn't have to spend all the time actually compiling the paperwork and doing the underwriting. They have time to have a relationship. And there will be small businesses. I can tell you, small businesses want that relationship. So I think there is room for local solutions with the help of technology, and that relationships will still stay an important part of providing the capital.
So let's talk about that for a second, because obviously there are companies here today that operate purely online, and yet they maintain good relationships with their customers. It's not a face-to-face physical relationship. You know, there are certainly those. You know, there are companies that have great NPS scores. They never physically, or very rarely, get to physically interact face-to-face with their customers, but they do have these positive relationships. So how does it work in an online world?
Well, I think this is, once again, a problem that I think the innovators in this room are eager to solve. Because imagine that you have a bot that gives you advice, and then maybe you also have a person who gives you advice. That person may be co-located or located down the street, or they may be located on the other end of a chat, or they might be on the phone with you, or they could be any one of those sort of geographically distant or proximate relationships. And different small businesses will choose different kinds of advice and counsel. So I think building this strong connection with a customer is going to be fundamental, because then they will put their bank account with you, they will use you to grow, they will use you for advice, they will use you probably for insurance and other financial products, for savings. And that ecosystem around a small business owner, I think, will be the core to success in the financial services market, doing that well, both online and, as I say, for many, in a community.
Right, right. So I remember there was a study done by Cabbage that they said they had something like $1 billion of lending done outside of banking hours. And so doesn't that mean that really, if you're a bank, how do you react to that? I mean, do you have to have a Cabbage type solution where you can get a loan in like 7 minutes or something, or how do you do that?
Well, I'm a big fan of Cabbage, and I think that they are exactly going in this direction, which is they are providing this community around the small business owner in a virtual way, in what we described. And it may be there's a small business owner who has to do it outside banking hours. It may be there's a different small business owner who wants that physical relationship. So as I said, in this world, there is room for both. The key to success, though, will be in figuring out how to provide the data infrastructure and then the algorithms that actually provide the right insight into the creditworthiness of the small business owner for the lender, and into the operating cash flows of the business for the business owner themselves. And those are two sides of the same coin, but they need to be delivered with a different customer experience. And that will, I think, differentiate the winners and losers. There are others, Square, who have this small business-centric notion. And one other thought on that, which is, small business is really the poor cousin of consumers. And when I listen to a lot of the presentations, I hear some of these solutions coming out for consumers. Well, what's going to happen in the consumer market, I'm warning you, is that margins are going to get tighter, because the solutions are actually fairly simple. If you take 10 pieces of data, you know whether you should give a customer a mortgage. But it's much more complicated for small businesses. So I think the better margin will be in small business.
Interesting. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about regulation for a little while. I know you said you devoted quite a bit in your book to it. There's been, we're here in California. They have passed a new law, SB 1235. There was a lot of talk about it here yesterday. It's still, all the rules have not been implemented yet, but it's all. There's a whole piece around borrower protection, because consumers have the Truth in Lending Act it's been implemented for decades. Small business owners don't have a similar type protection. What's your view on borrower protection for small business?
Well, I find it extraordinarily annoying that small business slips through the regulatory cracks. If I buy a truck as a consumer, I get a Schumer box, I get all the information and disclosure. If I buy a truck for my landscape business, none of that applies.
Right.
I just think that's dumb and not right for the small business owner. And to prove it, I actually, there was a set of focus groups with small business owners about what a loan cost. And I give this to my students at Harvard Business School and alumni of Harvard Business School and all kinds of audiences, and nobody can figure out what the interest rate is. So the notion that you shouldn't provide them with a simple disclosure, why shouldn't you? We do it for consumers. We should do it for small business owners.
Okay, so then what about, if you look at the whole regulatory infrastructure, I know you go through this in depth in the book, and It's crazy when you look at all the different government agencies that interact with for small business. So
I call it spaghetti soup.
yeah, well, you've got this
There's
great chart.
7 of them.
You've got this
all
great chart in your book with all these lines going everywhere,
Yeah.
all the different regulatory agencies that impact it. So, I know we've only got 5 minutes left, but how do you fix it?
Well, I actually think that Congress can't fix that. I actually think Congress can't fix much these days. But if they were to try, what I would advise is there's a couple things that are worrisome. There's a whole set of things around duplication and overlap, which are actually very hard to get right, but they should work. The place that I think is going to be critical is deciding whether or not we are going to adopt open banking. Who owns the customer data? And I say quite strongly in the book that the regulatory agencies need to get together and stop fighting the last war, which basically is let's get rid of all the Dodd-Frank regulation because it was too stifling. They should fight the next war, and the next war is going to be about data ownership. And the question is, how do you make sure that all of the innovation in this country can access the data in a safe and secure way with the customer's permission and do what is now being begun in the UK, start to provide these platforms like the Small Business Utopia information dashboard and different lending infrastructures, and Plaid, which also provides APIs. And if you do that, then you open up the playing field for Square and Amazon and the banks and the community banks and the fintechs to all do their best work. So that's I think the pivotal regulatory question that's coming is data ownership. And I advocate that we copy what is being tried and let the UK and Europe sort of work it out, take the best practice from there, and in the next 12 to 18 months, implement our version.
Well, it's interesting to me because it seems like helping small business is a bipartisan issue. There's not many bipartisan issues today, but everyone wants to help small businesses. You think that they could sort of, what you talked about there feels like it's a long way off, but at the same time, everyone wants to help small business. How can we actually get them to move?
I call this the political paradox, which is that everybody says small business is the backbone of the economy, and nobody wants to do anything to help them. So I spend actually quite a bit of time in the book, in the beginning, try to understand why this is. And part of it is because macroeconomists don't see small business having an impact on the economy. It's the consumer, it's investment, it's the government spending. But if you look at the microeconomy, small businesses are not only half of the jobs. Half of the people who work in this country own or work for a small business. So they should be important to every constituent. And we have an opportunity right now to maybe transform a critical piece of their life, access to credit. I would hope in the next year we do a Small Business Jobs Act through Congress. It would be bipartisan, and it would give everybody an opportunity to go home to their constituents and say, we did something.
Right. Well, let's hope. Okay, we're almost out of time, but so maybe you could leave us with some predictions for the future. You've certainly you've been around small business for decades. You've seen a lot of changes, particularly in the last decade. So what do you think? How do you think it's going to look? Small business lending will look in the future.
Well, one thing I say is there will be small business-focused banks. And I want to give a credit to Frank Rotman, who has been saying this for a while, but to amplify it, I think that one of the things that we will see in small business is there will be margin there. There will be small business banks that also focus on verticals. So you saw this a little bit with Live Oak, which started with veterinarians. Somebody told me the other day that a very large part of Bank of America's portfolio is dentists. Because once you figure out how to lend to one dentist or one funeral home, you know what that formula is. It solves that heterogeneity issue. So in the future, I imagine there will be small business focused banks. There will be a financial dashboard available to small business owners that will show them their future cash flow. There will be credit on that dashboard at the push of a button. And all this will be enabled by the technology that was really started by your initial LendIt audiences and the ones today who see that if you help small businesses, you really are not only contributing to the economy, you're really contributing to access and opportunity. Because small business owners really do exemplify the American dream. And this is the story of my family. So it's one of the things, reasons that motivates me to go out and try to create this future where small businesses have the opportunity to get their capital, to grow their business, to employ others in their community, and to achieve that American dream.
Okay, well, on that note, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Karen.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it.